Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to AJ102 Introduction to Criminal Justice. My name is Tony Farrar, and of course, I am your instructor for this semester. And this is going to be our final chapter, and one that is not in your textbook. But it's important that we put a little bit more emphasis on this because many of you want to get into the criminal justice field. So while we touched on it a little bit throughout the chapter, there wasn't a whole section on it. So this is kind of an added section, okay? So what do we hope to gain from this section? Well, understand the benefits of a balanced and integrated police department. Describe some of the advantages that exist for law enforcement agencies that hire and retain more women. List the steps and requirements that are usually involved in police officer selection. So how do you get from point A to point B, right? Summarize some of the guidelines and regulations related to the hiring process. Take a look at the what we call probation, or the probationary period, which is kind of that training period. Understand what the primary purpose of a union is and why you might have a union in your organization. Most do, some don't. Explain what accreditation means, and then identify some key elements of professionalism. But we're going to look a little bit broader as well. We're going to evaluate different agencies, because part of your choice is, first of all, figuring out, hey, where do I want to work, okay? And then we'll get into all that. But with all that said, never before in the history of policing in the U.S. has it been more important to hire the right people for this particular job. And becoming a law enforcement professional is no easy task, and it's not to be treated lightly, because in today's social climate, those who aspire to wear the badge must really be prepared to have their kind of everyday lives, if you will, kind of scrutinized, both on the job and even off. And, they must choose this noble profession, if you will, for the right reasons, of which there are many, and understand that this is, that the career is, above all else, one of service. So this is a service-oriented career. So if you don't have service in your mind somewhere, it may not be the right thing for you. Now, the IACP, which stands for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, has started kind of an interesting campaign. It started a couple of years ago, actually. It's called Why I Wear the Badge. And I believe I have a link as we go through this presentation or this lecture as well, and you can go there. And there's different levels of police professionals discussing and, why they got into the profession. It's kind of a campaign that helps highlight the diversity and commitment of those who choose that career in law enforcement. And we know that, that the badge is a symbol of courage and strength and integrity, and they kind of talk about some of these things. But we also know that with the display of the badge comes a huge responsibility, right? So, why do hundreds of thousands of men and women wear the badge each day? And that's kind of why I Wear the Badge movement or campaign was started. And, students that, are encouraged to explore a lot of the different videos and photos and other testimonials in this area to really kind of look at the challenges and the rigors of law enforcement. Because we know that, jobs change, careers change over time, right? Each decade kind of brings in new challenges and different things, and it's no different than any other career. So, today's law enforcement agencies, again, seek those types of officers who possess the physical qualities traditionally associated with policing, strength, endurance, as well as the emotional and intellectual characteristics needed to basically affect public order in this ever-changing and increasingly complex society. And because of that, really, people skills have become a very critical tool for law enforcement officers, just as things like critical thinking and technology skills have evolved, right? And then finally, before we kind of jump in, a session, it was actually kind of a listening session for the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, was held back on February 14th of 2015 in Phoenix, Arizona, during which the issues of police officer selection, training, and education were discussed at length, and as they kind of fit or pertain to building a police force capable of dealing with the increasingly complex issues in policing. And out of that, task force members really emphasized the need for agencies to place value on both educational achievements and socialization skills when they do their hiring processes. And they really stress that hiring of officers who reflect the community they serve is important not only to external relations, but also to increased understanding within the agency and the community themselves. So a lot of things for us to kind of look at. And I know we all kind of have our stereotypical type thing of policing, etc. And I believe in the introduction to this lecture module, you saw, I hope you took the time to watch those. There were, I believe, 3 or 4 videos from LAPD on their hiring process. And I have a couple links to some videos here from the Sheriff's Department that also kind of goes over the hiring process. So take the time to watch those. And again, some of us have these stereotypes in policing, and it could be, the joke of the donut shop. And okay, if you don't know what that really means, why do police officers tend to kind of maybe congregate around donut shops? Well, in the middle of the night is when you would see them there, because in a lot of cities, that's the only place that's open. And this is really the truth. It doesn't mean that we don't like donuts, because absolutely I do. My favorite is like the little, cake donut with the sprinkles on the top. Okay, so I have my favorite. But with that said, the better coffee in the middle of the night is going to come from a donut shop versus a restaurant or a 24-hour fast food place, if that makes any sense. And some cities, again, don't have certain places that stay open or all night. So that really is the answer to that. But again, we see the stereotype, but why don't we see this stereotype? Right? So, I mean, we have all these different stereotypes as we look at law enforcement. We watch TV and we see, hey, it's kind of cool, like this group here from NCIS, or maybe it's the Clint Eastwood type thing. Well, really, it's a lot different, you guys. So I just want you to really understand that things are different than what you're watching on television. So, what then are some desired qualities that are to be looked for from police officers? So the majority of individuals believe that, and it is true, that officers should be able to work under pressure, right? Accept direction, be able to problem solve, and then again, communicate effectively, both verbally and in writing. Writing is so important, okay? They should have, self-respect and some ego control, and have initiative and integrity and leadership and the ability to command respect. So it's not just the knuckle draggers of early years, because before it was basically if you're big and you're strong and you're that kind of thing, then you're going to be the great police officer. Well, maybe back then, but not now. So there's a lot of different characteristics that make up a well-rounded and truly efficient and effective law enforcement officer. So a couple of more: they should be able to use good judgment, be considerate, compassionate, dependable, enthusiastic, ethical, fair, flexible, honest, humble, industrious, right? Being able to kind of think outside the box, intelligent, logical, motivated, neat, observant, persuasive, fit, prompt, resourceful, self-assured, sensitive, stable, tactful, warm and willing to learn and accept change. So it's not like TV, right? As I start to read these desired qualities to you, because again, it's such a complex job and you deal with so many different people from so many different backgrounds, places, beliefs, etc. So one can only imagine all of these desired qualities. So if you think this job is super easy, you're absolutely wrong, because look at everything I've already explained to you on how the people want you to be. And depending upon the situation, you have to be able to be all of this, or some of this, or part of this. So I really hope that that kind of sinks in. So again, never before in the history of policing in the U.S. has it been more important to hire the right people for the job. Because becoming a law enforcement professional really is no easy task, and it's not to be treated lightly. It's difficult. And in today's climate, those who aspire to wear that badge, again, must be prepared to have their every action scrutinized, whether it's in the media, an article, a newspaper, on TV, etc. And you really have to choose this profession for the right reasons, which there are many reasons, and understand that the career is, above all else, it's going to be one of service. Okay? And today's law enforcement agencies, again, they seek officers who possess qualities traditionally associated with policing, like we talked about: strength, right, endurance, as well as the emotional and intellectual characteristics needed to affect public order in this ever-changing and increasingly diverse society. And people skills, without a doubt, have become a critical tool in law enforcement for law enforcement officers, as has the advent of, or advancement of, technology. And just finally, and I kind of went over this briefly at the beginning, just understand that there was this, back in 2015, the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And during the meeting, there were a lot of issues, like I spoke of, that were discussed. And agencies were encouraged to look for and hire applicants who possessed character traits that support things like fairness, compassion, understanding, tolerance, and cultural sensitivity. So a lot of these things came out of these different meetings. But first, right, before you decide, hey, I want to get into law enforcement and all this other stuff that kind of comes with it, you have to be able to select your agency, right? So, before an agency can screen and select a candidate, you, the candidate, must first figure out where I want to go, what I want to do. So you have to select that type of agency. And it's done by researching the available options that are out there, and assessing your professional goals, and then evaluating and selecting specific agencies to apply for. And there are several factors that are important to those seeking employment in law enforcement, including but maybe not limited to, the advantages and disadvantages of let's say municipal, county, state, or federal agencies. Municipal being like local, like a city police; county being more like sheriff; state being more like a state agency; or federal being more like federal FBI, CIA, or another federal type agency. TSA, something like that, because they all have there's differences with each one of them. And then working in a small, medium, or large agency, there's good and bad to each one of those. In a small agency, you know everybody, right? Maybe you're not just a number, a badge number, a last name, etc., but yet there may not be as much room for advancement, or as many opportunities for what we call specialized assignments, meaning I want to work canines, or narcotics, or SWAT, or forensics, but they may not have these at that small agency, where they might have some of them at a medium agency or all of them at a large agency, But yet at the larger agency, let's say LAPD with 10,000 cops, or New York or whatever, these agencies that have, between 8 and 20,000, people working for them, you're not going to more than likely be known, especially when you get into the game at the very beginning. And then, crime rates, high crime versus low crime, busy departments versus maybe not so busy, maybe working where you grew up or where you live. And some agencies like it, where, and some officers like working in the community that they grew up in because they know about it, they can be part of it, etc. Or it's easier to become part of it. And some officers kind of think, well, maybe I don't want to work where I live because maybe I'll run into somebody that I have to, that I've had a run-in with on the job or something like that. So there's just little things for you to kind of think about. So these are all these different factors, right? And, some other factors to kind of consider would be things like, the salary, your retirement, or, fringe benefits, the opportunity to work varied assignments in a broad spectrum of the department, maybe the department's morale and reputation, the potential again for advancement or promotion. What are the agency's current needs? Is there a hiring freeze? Have they not had a raise in a while? Do they have educational incentive? Do they have certificate pay? And I'll talk about certificate pay when it comes to peace officer standards and training in California. Okay. So all of these things are things that you should look at. And a chart from 2018, and it pretty much is the same right now. You can see those states that tend to pay higher are typically kind of on the West Coast. And yeah, there's a few back over in here, but the cost of living is going to be a lot higher over here in, say, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, etc. Right? So the cost of living is going to be high, even though you make a lot. Now, the cost of living is fairly high, maybe in California, but not as high maybe here. And then you can kind of look through the annual pay as well. And this is kind of the annual mean wage. But you need to think about these things, right? And so how does a law enforcement candidate find an open position to evaluate? And a lot of these departments are very progressive, and they have websites, and you can, there's the Peace Officer Standards and Training, there's Indeed, there's policejobs.com, there's all these different things. And again, we'll take a look at some of these, but you need to start doing your research and really figure out, where do I want to go? Again, there's the local municipal agency, it's a city. If you work for a county, more than likely you might do time in the jail first. So you might do 1 year to 3 years working in custody, and then you go out in the street. So that's something for you to consider. Okay. So again, a lot of things to kind of think about as we go through this. And I would really suggest that you go back and you watch some of these videos that the links are embedded in this particular lecture, or make sure that when you go through the module, if there are any videos for you to watch, do so, because it gets a little more specific as to the qualifications, both physically and academically, etc., in order to get a job in this field. So, talking about desired qualities of law enforcement or still officers still in selecting an agency. In most states, law enforcement candidates must meet a rigorous physical and personal qualification. We'll talk about the background a little bit in just a minute, but a lot of the common qualifications would be basically a U.S. citizen, a valid driver's license, and no felony convictions. And if you had a felony conviction, and it was reduced down to a misdemeanor, that would probably be okay, but it would be agency to agency that decides on those. And each agency is different. So just because you've had an issue maybe and you have some baggage or whatever you want to call it, we all have baggage, don't fret or worry or stress out. Just push forward with your conviction to get into this type of career, if this is really what you want to do, and let the agency decide what they're willing to accept and not. okay, because each agency, again, is a little bit different. So again, in most states, law enforcement candidates must be U.S. citizens, meet the physical and personal qualifications. Um, and again, if citizens were really asked about the different traits that they thought were desirable for police officers, their responses would be considerably different. Um, but would include the following. And you know, people think differently. If you kind of just sit there and think to yourself, now what do I believe are the qualities of law enforcement? You know, what would be the best ones? I think we would all be we'd think a little different, um, especially with maybe the top one or two. But again, and it kind of mirrors some of the other qualities that we talked about, but officers should be able to work under pressure, accept direction, problem solve, communicate effectively, again, verbally and in writing. Okay, if you're a little bit shy and you're not super outgoing, you're going to have to kind of work through that. If you don't write well, it doesn't mean that you won't get in. It means that you need to work on your writing. Okay, take the AJ105. You know, it used to be called report writing, but now it's tactical communication and report writing for law enforcement. Take that course. It'll really, really help you. Okay, so kind of moving on, they should have self-respect, ego control, initiative, integrity, leadership skills, the ability to command respect from others. So again, a lot of stuff, a lot more. Good judgment, considerate, compassionate, dependable, enthusiastic, ethical, fair, flexible, honest, humble, industrious. Oh my gosh, intelligent, logical, motivated, neat. Meaning like you take care of yourself and your uniform and you look professional. Observant, persuasive, fit, prompt, resourceful, self-assured, sensible, stable, tactful, warm, and willing to listen and accept change. And accept change, as a former chief, I'm going to tell you that's really important because policing changes, right? And we've learned that throughout this course, right? I mean, look at after 9/11, policing changed. Community policing changed. A lot of things are changing. Different technology, police change. So there's all this change, and if you can't adapt to change, you're going to have a really, really hard time in this, you know, type of a career. So you have to be able to change, okay? Now, you know, just before we kind of move on, understand that no one really has all of those traits, right? I mean, that was a lot of stuff that I mentioned. But the more of those traits that a police officer possesses, or you, if you're going to get into this field, the more effective that you will be in dealing with the citizens of the community as well as those that violate the law. So not just one group, but both. And it's really important that you understand that as well, because there are those two groups, right? There's the community members, your fellow peers. Well, maybe there's a third group that I kind of thought of while I'm talking. But there's, you know, externally, there's the community, and then there's those that break the law, and you still have to be able to deal with them within a lot of those things that I talked about, but there's also your peers as well. Okay, so when we talk a little bit about those desired qualities of law enforcement, earlier I mentioned the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And things that kind of came out of that. So again, they came out with a lot of the different qualities, abilities, and capacities, if you will, as being essential to incoming recruits. So this is what they're looking for, and it's an actual report that you can look up. So the first was community policing and problem-solving principles, understanding what community policing is and means, and having those problem-solving principles. Interpersonal and communication skills, super important, right? Being able to talk to people and get along with people. Having some bias awareness, knowing where your faults might be, and understanding if you have bias and we all tend to have some kind of a bias somewhere, okay, if we're going to be honest with ourselves. So understanding where that is and how to deal with it. Scenario-based situational decision-making. So being able to critically think. Okay, crisis intervention principles. Okay, being able, again, application of critical thinking, etc. Understand procedural justice and impartial policing. Trauma and victim services, mental health issues, being aware of mental health issues, being able to analytically research things and understand technology, and languages and cultural responsiveness. Because really, with our society becoming just so diverse, which is a great thing, it really is critical that officers are able to police without bias, discrimination, and also be sensitive to the needs and concerns of different populations within a community. And, you know, you may not think of it now, but understand that different communities are going to require maybe they have different issues, different things. And if that doesn't make sense, I'll give you a great example. I have a couple friends that work in Newport Beach and in Huntington Beach and in Beverly Hills. I started my career in Compton, California. Okay, great learning experience for me, wonderful people, etc. I loved working there, and I ended up lateraling to a different agency later on. But those communities are different, and they have different issues. They still all deserve the same type of justice, policing, response, etc. But the cities themselves have different things going on, right? And so there are different needs. So we have to be sensitive to the needs and the concerns of the different populations that reside within the city that we police. So I hope that kind of makes sense to everybody. So how do we find these qualified individuals, right? Well, really, it's not an easy task, okay? And I can tell you that, again, I retired in December of 2015 as the police chief for the City of Rialto Police Department. I worked my way up from officer all the way up to chief, okay? And I know that finding qualified individuals is not an easy task. Recruiting, screening, and selecting candidates, it's a continuous, critical function of every agency. And the generational transition, right, that's kind of underway and at the center of the workforce crisis that existed before the economic crisis changed the picture kind of drastically, resulted from the convergence of two trends, the growing number of aging baby boomers, right, and the much smaller cohort of younger people, the Gen Xers who kind of followed them. And, you know, as we can kind of see, as we start to go a little bit further, we have the Gen Y, right? And we've got the Gen Z, and we have these different generations. And it's tough. You know, members of the 102 million strong millennial generation, okay, or kind of Generation Y, if you will, right? Born between, let's say, 82 and, 2002, kind of give or take right around in there, you know, have yet to fully affect the law enforcement workplace, but they're right there. And actually, they're already in, because we're already in 2021. You know, but they're going to be the majority of these police officers, and we've seen this, police officers, deputies, etc., you know, coming through. We have the Gen Z. So we've got these Y and Z folks that are a little bit different. There's this generational transition. So there's a little bit, things are different because they see things different and they do things different. So we in law enforcement really need to understand, well, how do we select these individuals? And a little bit, kind of going a little bit further, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to find qualified applicants? And I can tell you again, as a chief, about 1 out of every 100 are going to make it. Why is that? Well, I mean, there are some reasons for that, okay? and we'll talk about a couple of those, right? So again, about 1 out of every 100 applicants make it through the whole process. And finding qualified applicants became a little bit tougher, especially back after 9/11. A lot of folks joined the military. There's negative publicity in general. There's negative media publicity over high-profile incidents of, excessive force and justified force. There's still, media, negative publicity, even if it's okay and it was within policy and everything went right. The media tends to sometimes be a little bit negative. So that's another reason why it might be difficult. Some of the hindrances that we know that kind of stand in the way. We talked about the new generation of applicants. Things are a little different now. Because this is a career. This is not a job. It's not something that you just kind of get into for a little bit. A lot of folks get into this, and some of them find out when they get in, hey, this really isn't what I thought it was going to be. And then some make a whole career out of it. But you do have the new generation of applicants being able to dispel misconceptions of the job that are caused by the media and TV and the news. Maybe some recruiting hindrances could be lack of diversity. It could be low pay. So, I mean, a lot of these things are important for us to kind of understand. Law enforcement, who would want to get into this job at like $18 an hour when you're putting your life on the line, right? So it's important. Low pay could be a thing. Some other challenges could be increased educational requirements, may have limited the pool of applicants. And over the decades, I have seen law enforcement agencies go from you just need a high school diploma or a GED to you have to have maybe 60 units of college. Some organizations require an associate's degree. Federal agencies require a bachelor's degree. So to kind of make things more professional, et cetera, just like a lot of these other career paths, you're starting to see the educational requirements ramp up. And as I said, people need to know that this is a calling. You have to want to serve. Okay, it's not just a job, right? You're going to want to, you want to do it. You have to have a desire and a drive. So, some of the strategies that kind of come into this would be things like, recruiting strategies would be, and you see it now more than you have ever, especially in my career, but, law enforcement agencies have websites out there. We've got personal contact, newspaper ads, job fairs. You'll see it all the time where policing organizations are advertising on Facebook, on Instagram, all these different new things. Social media has become kind of the basis for advertising for jobs, etc. And you see a lot of, you can kind of look at these flyers as an example, right? You're seeing a very diverse kind of broad brush of trying to get diverse individuals, including women, into the workforce. And these were from a little while ago. I understand that, but I kind of wanted you to see that you can see, Facebook, all these different social media platforms, right? Twitter, Instagram, etc. And, take the LAPD exam. They're holding them at colleges or certain places. And, San Bernardino Valley College, there's a workshop, right? And then there's the entrance exam at this particular time. So just trying to kind of market policing to everybody out there. I talked about it again, social media, recruiting videos. A lot of organizations have recruitment videos. I believe at the intro there was the Rialto video, and I hope you watched it because it was actually really cool. And I'll post a link to it if you haven't seen that. But it took a long time to do that. But recruiting videos to kind of just like where any other business would advertise. Hiring, testing events, and even very specific events just for women. We're trying to get more women into the workforce. before I retired, we actually had our first annual women's fitness challenge where you could go out and you could test your physical fitness. And it was designed for just women, and to go out and talk to other women on how they got into law enforcement and what are some of the hurdles and the challenges and etc. So it really was it was a fabulous event, and these are things that you're really starting to see. And of course, when you talk about recruitment, you have to talk about recruiting for diversity. It's vital to law enforcement's continued success. Okay. And when you talk about something that was said by IACP, we have learned that to be effective, police cannot operate alone. They require the active support and assistance of their communities, and central to maintaining that support is the recognition that law enforcement agencies must reflect the diversity of the communities that they serve. Every day, our officers come into contact with individuals from different cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic classes, religions, sexual orientation, physical and mental abilities, and each of these groups brings a different perspective to the police community relations, and as a result, our officers must be prepared to respond to each group in an appropriate fashion, right? So it's important that we recruit from where we serve, and that kind of makes sense. I hope that does kind of make sense. So to attract more diverse recruits, agencies have started to advertise in a different light, portraying many aspects of police work, such as participating in community policing events, assisting those in need, working with youth in schools, and many departments have ads showing minorities and women, etc., in higher level positions. Yeah. And then I would be kind of remiss if I really didn't talk just a little bit about budget, because we talk about, well, how do, when we're hiring, how much money really goes towards the police. So I thought I would just take a second, kind of break up the monotony a little bit here, but just talk quickly about a budget. And this is an actual budget. So this is the city of Rialto's budget for 16-17. And if you look through, you can see, here's the revenue, right, by source, etc. And then you can see here that this amount, right, the largest amount, 37% police, 24% fire, other public works, non-department, goes to policing. So why would you not want to take into consideration and hire the best of the best and diverse, etc., everything I've been talking about? Because the largest portion of taxpayers' money, etc., is going for this. So if you were in a community, regardless, and it's going to be the same in every community, maybe not 37%, but you're going to see the largest chunks are going to be for public safety, and typically police is usually a little bit larger than fire. Maybe not always, but typically it's going to be. And with that being said, if you're going to spend all of those dollars, etc., you want to make sure that you are getting those individuals that you want. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit in just a second about the importance of hiring well, because that is super important. So we know that there's a lot of different recruiting strategies. We've kind of gone over that a little bit. A lot of departments, as I said, are focusing on recruiting, people fresh out of college. A lot of them are basically there's a big drive on women in law enforcement, minorities in law enforcement, to increase diversity, etc. Some departments are focusing on recruiting kind of second career officers, right? So maybe someone that was a former teacher or a dental tech or even a nurse, a paramedic, even a business person, that they've kind of done that career and now they're going to switch careers. But at the end of the day, Nevertheless, college does remain, and this is an important plug for you because you're in class, right? College does, or colleges remain a fundamental source of police recruits. So a lot of, colleges that have these criminal justice programs, et cetera, are kind of helping to feed into law enforcement. And a lot of these colleges they kind of partner up, if you will, right, from local colleges, right? So it is important to understand that, what you're doing right now, if you're going into policing, that this is really going to help you out, especially if you end up with, a certificate in AJ or an associate degree for transfer, etc. Okay, so a couple other things of hiring well, and then we'll take our first break. So a couple of important things to talk about, really critical things, will be these 3 terms. And this is why we stress again the importance of hiring well. So there's a term called vicarious liability. And this is the legal responsibility one person has for the acts of another. So myself, as an example, as a former police chief, if I was still in the job as chief, if you do something, I can be liable for what you do, right? So legal responsibility one person has for the acts of another. So you could see the importance of a chief, sheriff, etc., wanting to hire well. Civil liability is the legal obligation that's incurred for an injury or similar that results from a failure to conduct a specific task within a specific standard. So maybe an employee that doesn't follow policy or something like that, right? And typically you can see the dollar signs because that's a monetary thing. And then you have what's called negligent hiring. And negligence in hiring personnel is unqualified for the position or unsuited for law enforcement, etc., can really come back around again, and whoever is running the organization, etc., could be sued for negligent hiring. So maybe the person has been fired from a couple of places, but they decided to give the person a chance and they did something else, maybe similar to what they did that got them fired from a different place, right? Or they had just too many red flags, let's say, in their background, but you hired them anyway. So that would be a negligent hiring thing. So again, this kind of all falls into the importance of, making sure that you hire, those people, right? The importance of hiring well, and hopefully it gives you a sense on maybe why maybe some people may not get hired, right? Because of these different terms right here. Okay, so with that being said, this would be a good place. We're almost at the 45-minute mark. Let's take our first break now. I'm hoping to be able to finish up at the end here. I should, but if not, maybe we'll just go a little bit longer. But this will conclude part 1 of our chapter on becoming a law enforcement professional.